Hello and welcome to session 320 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be going through a consultation on the Commission guidelines to clarify the scope of the general purpose AI rules in the AI Act. So this is a consultation which is kind of a very non-standard document compared to the ones we normally read, because there's a sense that the questions that we are answering right now are transient. If everybody forget them tomorrow, then basically no harm done. The object here is not to actually understand the document, but to give some kind of answer to that. And for this reason, I won't go through what the documents say in detail here. We will instead, after this quick introduction, try to write some answers. And we have already written some answers. And these are answers that come not from like a general perspective, but from the point of view of AI existential safety. That means that, I'm not denying that things like copyright and AI ethics are important. They are. It's just that AI existential safety is more important, and that's the thing that we specialize in. Another thing is that some people make a distinction between existential safety and other kinds of safety, and we are mostly focused on the irrecoverable incidents. And that kind of sounds callous, that if the AI kills a lot of people, but it is possible to react to this, then this is a different kind of a problem compared to an AI takeover where you cannot, in fact, recover and do over. Another thing is we are trying to be somewhat pragmatic. So we are not trying to give the answers to the consultation that would result in a perfect EU AI Act. But we are also not trying to, right now, if you just take the default assumptions, then it is very close to 0% in that it helps 0%. But we are trying to give some answers that meaningfully helps the EU AI Act prevent existential risk from AI. That means that we are suggesting potentially some rather serious modifications, and possibly also some that are somewhat outside the Overton window. We have some internal assumptions about the field of AI. One is that this is a field that is moving very, very rapidly. We just saw, I think this week, text diffusion models, and so we are not just having large language models anymore. And this is kind of an important thing, that if we try to make some guidelines that relate very much to how does the field look right now, it can risk being obsolete very, very quickly. Another thing that probably the people in this reading group share is that both a lot of effort is required to reach existential safety, but also that it's possible. Just less than 24 hours ago, Ursula von der Leyen made a speech where she quite explicitly called for a lot of extra funding for dealing with AI this year, because there is a substantial expectation that there may be human-level AI in 2026, which is very soon. Another thing is the relation to the developers, like Google and DeepMind, ChatGPT, OpenAI, where we probably have a reasonably adversarial relationship with them. I believe that they do not, in fact, care about existential safety, and I believe we have seen a lot of places where they are trying to sabotage existing regulation. And that means that the regulation that the EU does needs to not rely on their goodwill, but be the kind of regulation that you do with companies that are polluting a lot and things like that. Going deeper into AI safety, one of the key cruxes probably for how we relate to this is, and this is also the thing that they're asking about, like, is compute a good metric for deciding whether a model should be regulated? And for us, we care about whether the model is dangerous. And this is something where I'm skeptical, and a lot of people are skeptical, and this is something we're going to talk a lot about today. The other thing is, okay, if we can't do that, then there may be something else we can do, and benchmarks seems to be the common answer. Benchmarks are, of course, also far from perfect or easy. It's no panacea. I don't know how to pronounce that. So another thing that is probably not commonly accepted is what models cause AI existential risk. It is my belief that the top few models cause by far most of the risk. Like right now, there is a spread between like the top three models: ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and then it's a bit step down to DeepSeek, and then further Mistral and Llama and all these, and then you get pretty far down in capabilities. So there is a potential to like if these top models are the most dangerous, then we should focus by far the most on these. And on the other hand, this means that the less capable models are mostly harmless. And this creates something that is very politically expedient, because if the less capable models are mostly harmless, then we could just not regulate them at all. And open source models right now are arguably the same case, that we could potentially just not regulate those. And that the fact that we are focusing the regulation very, very tightly on the things that are actually dangerous is something that I think is important in itself, but it's also extremely politically expedient. There is some a kind of strange side effect of this is that, like, if we choose to regulate the top three companies, well, those all happen to be from the United States, which is kind of strange. Should the EU? How can the EU regulate these companies? I think they just straight up can. I'm definitely not an expert on EU law, but from a moral point of view, I think because we share the risks of an AI catastrophe, then I think demanding some safety specification from them is totally reasonable. Another thing that is probably pretty important is, can we in fact make rigorous safety cases? And it is my belief that this is something that is still out of reach, and that is of course something that is very substantial. A lot of people believe that this is something we have, and there's a sense that the EU AI Act might become something where we require that they have a safety case, and then we put that into law, and then we go to Google, and then Google is unable to produce a rigorous safety case because such a thing does not exist. And that means that then in practice this becomes not just a regulation, but something more powerful, potentially just shutting it down, which is of course pretty dramatic. But that is like my interpretation of how this will actually go. So with that intro out of the way, let's look at the actual document. And the actual document is this. So everybody feel free to start talking, and now the document has disappeared, literally. No, it's just the comments that have gone to the top somehow. Neat. Just a quick question, have the document disappeared? No. Okay, yeah, it's still there.
Oh, and by the way, I'm Serpentis.
Ah, you are. Great. Thank you. That does help. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about. Maybe we should start. Does anyone have any strong opinions about any of these cruxes or some of the previous? Do people in general agree with this? Is there something that is, because if people strongly disagree with like this assumption here, that existential risk is caused by the top few models, then that may dramatically influence what our submission should actually look like.
Well, I mean, I raised the whole current LLMs as really good test takers hypothesis
Mm.
in your document. And I think it's entirely possible that's true. Like it's entirely possible that most of the risk comes from a model that is like broadly more capable, but is less able to like answer specific programming questions. Like you're looking for a general capability, not in terms of can it solve these benchmarks, but as in can it like plan like a human being? And given like we know how like stuff like R1 is trained, I think you can make a really good case that R1 is actually a lot more dangerous than GPT-4, even though GPT-4, well,
Mm.
whatever the like 4.1, whatever the latest model is actually better on a lot of benchmarks than R1. If OpenAI grinds on their benchmarks a bit more, I still think R1 will be considerably more dangerous because it gets its capabilities through a means
Hmm.
that would make it dangerous. It is in some fundamental sense more generally capable, even though it performs worse on benchmarks than GPT-4.
Yeah, that's an interesting case. Like, if you have some model, like IXI would be an example of a model that would be really, really dangerous because it is very alien, right? That the way that, like, if ChatGPT is searching for vulnerabilities in order to do some hacking, then probably ChatGPT is doing that. I don't know why I say ChatGPT. GPT-4 is probably doing that in a way that is much more human-like than what IXI would do. And that means that we would expect the models that are very trained on human data to have a reasonably human-shaped capability profile. Whereas this Alpha Evolve would be an example. This is also a very new model that seems to be trained much more from nothing in a sense, rather than just human data. That's like going into Alpha Evolve would be. But I think this is also an example of a model that is potentially very alien and has potentially a very alien risk profile. Um, and I would agree that um, that benchmarks isn't actually a perfect proxy for capabilities. Um, so on the other hand, I expect that we can probably make some even better benchmarks than the ones we have that show like what are the actual dangerous capabilities. And I think this would be uh, pretty good. It's of course theoretically possible that the something that is trained not so much from on human data can find a way to take over that is just totally out of the blue that we could never have foreseen. But uh, yeah, then this doesn't work, but nothing else works in that case. Like if DeepSeek R1 finds something that we could not have expected that enables it to take over, then we are probably dead. But by definition, if it's something we can't have predicted, then the only option is to stop now in order to avoid that. And if that's not a possibility, then benchmark is the best we have. Do you agree with that?
I think we just need really good benchmarks. I
Yeah.
think we need to think about what type of benchmarks would work. Because, I mean, I think you can make an argument for a secret benchmark, but, and I think comparing outputs, I think it is between different models and
Hmm.
having humans rate them. And a head-to-head comparison is a pretty good idea. But I think we need to I think if we try really, really hard to think of a better benchmark, we can probably think of a better benchmark.
Yeah,
But
I think I
I
would
don't
agree
think
with that.
people,
That
yeah.
and I think this is something that we should write. That better benchmark is needed, and probably uh, we can, like, if we throw a lot of work into that, we can probably. There is in fact room for improvement, right? And this is something the EU should do.
Yeah, sure.
So
Yeah, just say that I'm basically on board with these points, but in the same way, I see I'm leaning towards compute being a better thing to use in the regulation for kind of the same reason, and also that it's like it has other benefits. It's predictable. You can know even before you have finished the model how much compute is going to be used. With like benchmarks, companies can claim like, oh, it's not going to pass these benchmarks up until the last minute, and then it's already, board, and it's maybe not released, but just that.
So this is actually an interesting question. Assume that you are like, how deterministic is this in fact? My understanding of when do you finish pre-training? I'm actually in doubt. I kind of get the sense, like when I did AI a long time ago, then I continued to train until I ceased getting better results. Like the loss gets lower and lower, and then you continue to train, and at some point it's not worthwhile because there's diminishing returns, and then you can't get a better loss, and then you stop training. But that also kind of meant that if you train with that methodology, then you do not in fact know how much compute you're going to use, because you're going to use until you until there's no further benefit, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You do of course have some idea, and probably a better idea than you would about capabilities. So I accept that compute-based metrics have a number of advantages. Like it's really nice to just say this number, above this number is bad, below this number is good.
Yeah. Also, the critique against compute in the Google document. Is it? Are we worrying both about false positive and false negatives, or maybe about that it will start capturing too many models that aren't actually dangerous, or also the other way around?
I think both false positives and false negatives is a substantial problem. I haven't actually tried to weigh which of these is worse, and I can it kind of depends on where you put that boundary. In that right now the boundary is pretty high, so probably you won't get a lot of false positives. But if you have the same boundary in 5 years,
what would be a positive in this case?
Okay, so let's. So the two options is that you have a model, and you it uses more than this amount of compute, but it is really, really far from being dangerous.
The obvious case is that modern LLMs by say ChatGPT is continuously fine-tuned, not necessarily to improve performance, but due to like various things that pop up, various political changes in whatever countries it's operating. So it doesn't increase capabilities, arguably, but a lot of it is to increase capabilities. So things get very confusing, but it is entirely possible to spend an enormous amount of compute fine-tuning the thing, but it doesn't really improve its capabilities by much.
In the same way, you can do different kinds of scaffolding that doesn't use any compute potentially at all, but improves the capabilities. And you can have like better ways of training, something like DeepSeek. That's the other way around, that you have potentially very capable models. But like if the algorithmic improvements continue as they have done so far, then probably in 1 year, you can have trained DeepSeek with like less than half the compute, and eventually it's gonna go below that. DeepSeek was right around the limit, and like if algorithms continue to improve, then that number needs to be updated in a sense, right? Otherwise, you'll just get a lot of very, very capable models that are below the limit. So
yeah, that seems like a pretty strong critique against using compute in that case. I guess it's kind of predictable, but though it's like it's linear, these algorithmic improvements. or
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that they are this linear, right? I would.
yeah.
Uh, I remember when I did my computer science degree, then very often we would have some kind of graph theoretic problem, and then we would make a naive algorithm, and this was quadratic, and then you would read some of the chapter, and then they had a an algorithm that was like n log n, and then this would translate to an extreme amount of an extreme improvement in performance. And we don't actually see this. We see a lot of small incremental advances, but we never see something like half the number, the orders of magnitudes for like training a model. That never happens, as far as I can tell. Like imagine that, like for graph theoretical problems, then you often see something that like cuts it down with cuts it down from 10 to the 22nd to 10 to the 11th, like half or something like that. That's the kind of thing you often see. Not that often, but sometimes. But if someone came up with a way to train DeepSeek on like half the order of magnitude, something that your computer could just do instantly, that would be pretty surprising. This is a thing that never happens. It could happen, but we're not seeing it. It is very, very predictable.
I mean, compared to what single layer perceptrons were probably, yeah, I mean, I think it happened like in 2014 or whatever when we, with like, what was it, AlexNet and a bunch of, pulling a scaling and pulling a bunch of old models that people hadn't used for decades. And that gave a massive, like, orders of magnitude increase in performance.
Yeah, that is in fact true. There are some also going from perceptrons. That was also an enormous advantage. That's probably the biggest one, the biggest improvement. And like the transformer architecture is pretty substantial. So I agree. We are mostly seeing small things, and it may be the anthropic shadow that is the reason why we're not seeing any big improvements. Because if someone found a way to just make AI immensely more powerful, then probably we would be dead very soon afterwards. If someone
I mean,
found,
that's kind of what actually happened in real life with transformers.
yeah, that is in fact something that is pretty scary, and also pretty possible. Let me just check here if there was anything here we also wanted. No. Okay, great. Then I suggest we go here. So in this, it's actually a radio button here where you can select yes and no. And I think the idea is to say no. Is this what's this here? This Google document looks very strange. Does it also look like this to you if you try to open it?
I'll try it.
Wow. This looks really bad. Like it's a lot that has disappeared, which is absolutely not cool. And just try to open
It looks fine to me. Maybe you can try reloading
Yeah.
the page.
Yeah, it looks fine to me.
Okay. So let's see. And now it looks fine for me as well. Phew. Okay, so it was just some kind of rendering error. Okay. So up here, Connor makes the very reasonable suggestion that we should rewrite this in a slightly different way. So instead of saying that compute is a bad thing, then say, yeah, we could actually do something even better. And I think that is just straight up right. And this is something that I think I will probably copy paste this in here. And then I will ask Gemini to improve this. So I don't. What are people's thoughts? If anyone has any strong objections to this?
I mean, I have a strong objection to using AI for creative writing when it's a novel case. Like when I try to use R1 to write my chronic wasting disease article,
Yeah.
it's tried to match. It took my ideas, made them sound like polish them and make them sound really good. But then I looked again, and it turns out it was matching my ideas to like the closest idea in the common gestalt. So it was like something that like fit into its preconceptions. Like it was like the nearest common idea, nearest well-known idea. That was what it was trying to match for. So it's like, if I had just didn't double check, I think I would have gotten an article that was completely that made a fundamentally different point from what I was trying to make. And that's not just like at the end for the article as a totality. I'm talking about every single step of the way, and by the end, it's like a completely different article.
That's really interesting. I must admit, I've also sometimes seen this happening, and like I'm on the lookout for this when I edit text with these models. So yeah, I think the warning is well received, and I will in fact try hard to avoid that. And I think probably a pragmatic compromise is to not ask ChatGPT to ask a model to rewrite it, but point out problems with how this is stated. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Great. Here I gave some examples on some benchmarks for large language models, and there are quite a few. Like a lot of them have just these like good luck trying to figure out what all these abbreviations are, right? But I also included some, like this is also perhaps indicative of how the field moves, that if we had written this document like when the EU AI Act was first introduced, then we would have said things like Hellaswag or Winogrand. You remember all these Winograd schemas that were a big deal 5 years ago? Say, hey, this is actually something that proves that GPT-3 is the most powerful model. And of course, these are things that change. And it's very possible that some of these have changed. I think there's humanities last exam is one that's pretty tough for current models. But I think, to my mind, these are like pretty good. I think it's possible to do better, but I also think let me just try to find the LLM leaderboard. This is this one, I believe. Oh no, this is the archive. Oh yeah, they stopped this. Okay, so this is a bad example. But there are other leaderboards. So there's this one. And there was another one that I referenced in the comments. But if you go through some of these, then basically the top models are the ones you expect. Like yeah, there is one with Grok 3 and Gemini and OpenAI was models, and like there is some spread between them, but one thing, like we don't see Mistral here, for instance, as far as I can tell. Possibly in some of them. Yeah, maybe in the fastest or more affordable models or something like that. Yeah, here we have one. I don't know. What is this? Nova Micro, but yeah, for lowest latency. So like the point is that these benchmarks align very well with my intuitive expectation that, of course, I had a really good one. This is the chatbot. Is it the Arena? I think this is the one that I've sent around. Isn't it? Maybe. Where we have where is the leaderboards? Here are the leaderboards here, and then I chose this overview here. So this is basically this is an example of how I feel that the overall field looks. Like you can see here, currently it's Gemini that's in front, and it takes the first place in basically most of these. And then we have O3, which is also like has a number of ones, but also a bit further down. And then as you go down, you get Grok 3, Gemini, DeepSeek is down here. So it's like the highest one it has is a 3. And then you go further down and like you know what all of them are. And then as you go further down, then these numbers like go up fairly evenly. Like there is one here, one model, Claude here, that is really good at one thing and very bad at all the others. But the numbers, the ratings are pretty tightly correlated. As you go down here, you will end up with like these models. Now I'm just looking at GLM4, which is kind of in the 80s all around, 70s, 80s. So there seems to be some very real like humans have this G factor, right? And there is something like that going on with these models as well. As you go down here, now you are with models that are, of course, perhaps a slightly larger spread when you get to the bottom, but even this down here looks very even in a sense. So I think there is a strong, real sense that the models on the top here, these are the smartest models, both in the most capable and the most dangerous, and the benchmarks align very well with like our expectations. Did that make sense?
I mean, how often do you use Gemini?
Not very often. Not very often. Gemini is the one I've used the least. It's the one I've most recently got access to. I have sometimes used it for the Gmail integration, which is really nice. And there is Gemini integration in this document here, so I could literally there is a button somewhere I can click to get it to summarize this document. Probably this one. Huh? Maybe another way I can put this is that I haven't heard from a lot of people saying that, yeah, it's possible that Claude underperforms a lot on benchmarks. It's actually a lot smarter than the benchmarks appear. This isn't something that a lot of people say. I can't offhand think of anyone. When was the last time someone said that to me, that this model has really high benchmarks, but when you try to use it, it's actually really poor? Or the other way around, this has low benchmarks, but when you use it, it's actually really good.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the former from a few Chinese AIs that no one else has heard of.
Yeah. I'm definitely not saying that there is a one-to-one correlation. I'm substantially away from this, but I haven't actually. That's actually pretty interesting. If you have a specific example of someone saying this model that is low on all these benchmarks, when you actually try to talk with it, then you can feel that it's actually really, really smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of hard for me to prove a negative in that saying that no one is saying this thing, but
I mean, it's like now we're getting to specifics of an AI, an LLM that's fine-tuned to seem intelligent is actually just studying for the test of sounding intelligence during brief interactions with humans, in some sense. And I get this a lot because I'll be really, really impressed by something an AI writes, and then I like try to edit it and I look closer at everything. I realize that it's actually like not that novel and kind of mediocre.
Yeah. Yeah, and another example would be this. There was this. Was it Gemini Plays Pokemon, or one of them that beat Pokemon? One of the old Pokemon games. pretty recently, which made a pretty
yeah.
big splash. And then when I actually looked into it, and then it turned out that humans were like doing so much special prompting with where humans were making 10 different models with different prompts and stitching them together in different ways in order to obtain this result, which was like a lot less impressive because it was not really fine-tuned, right? But kind of humans had done a huge amount of work in order to get it to actually play Pokemon. So that's not exactly the same as fine-tuning, but I would agree that this is problematic. We are
Yeah, I
definitely not.
mean,
Yeah.
it's like there isn't an obvious benchmark score for any benchmark that we're aware of where you can say, okay, past this point, which no current model has come close to, you can confidently assume that it would be able to play Pokemon, like a new Pokemon game, without being specifically trained for it.
That's actually interesting. I would expect in 1 year, if we look at this leaderboard and we take the top model and we just feed it Pokemon, then I believe it will be able to just straight up complete it in 1 year. That would be my expectation. That all this kind of scaffolding that humans are doing right now is something that pushes the state of the art maybe 1 year into the future.
You seem very confident that we're going to get something really impressive within a year. I mean, how confident were you of that a year ago?
I should really have written down some more predictions, huh? Interesting. Like, are there any of these models? What's the oldest of these models? Let me just go down and see when do we find models that are from last year. Here is DeepSeek.
I mean,
0324.
yeah, GPT-4, 4.0, I think. Older 4.0s.
Yeah, like obviously this says latest 2025 0326. So I'm looking for a model that was what was the state of the art 1 year ago, and I kind of get the sense that it was, filtered. It filtered away basically the entire top, possibly except this one is the
I
only
think
one.
it was ChatGPT, an older ChatGPT 4.0.
Yeah, let me just see if there are, like, it's possible that they remove them from this list. But my expectation is that the models that are state of the art.
Wouldn't you be able to scroll down and find older ChatGPT 4.0 models?
Let's see. This is kind of an annoying control to scroll down on. It's jumping for me. Is it also jumping for you? In a kind of annoying way. So here is 04 mini, but that's not an 01 preview, I believe was older.
Oh, it's right there in the middle. 01 2024. Yeah. We're right like above this.
It's jumping so much. This is so annoying.
I mean, use your scroll wheel maybe.
Yeah, I don't have a scroll wheel on this laptop. I should bring my mouse down.
Yeah, maybe you should like actually click the. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there a way to like sort, filter?
I mean, you could sort alphabetically and look for,
And then go down to, let's see if we take something like, yeah, DeepSeek would also be interesting. Gemini, we will take the, oh my God, this is so annoying to scroll down on.
Page up, page down.
Yeah,
you click on the. Oh, okay. There we go.
Now we have a lot of GPT-4s, right? So we're just looking at GPT-4, and there is one here with the preview, and then there is this one, GPT-4 0314, 0613. When are these from? This is totally opaque to me.
I assume 2023.
Yeah. And 4.5 preview is substantially better. So here, GPT 4.1, 2024. And you can compare that with 4.1. That is the same base model. Why is it called 4.1 here, actually, compared to?
4.1 came out after 4.5, by the way. These people are genuinely evil.
They are, in fact, really preventing us from really understanding this.
Oh,
Here,
there we go. ChatGPT 4.0 to 2024. Yeah.
so here are a couple of 4.0s, and here we can at least see some difference. In this there is like 3 months difference between these,
And it got considerably worse.
and got considerably worse.
I think this was back when they were fine tuning for it, like to not say naughty words or whatever.
Yeah, that might be something
Wait,
like that.
yeah.
Like my
Wasn't that? I think. Yeah.
okay, we are getting a bit sidetracked. Like my strong expectation is that every year the performance improves substantially. Something like how much? How much does the graph go up? Like, of course, there's a lot of benchmarks that are pretty visible on how much. I think Meta has published a lot of graphs on how these models improve year on year. And yeah, I think I don't think I can do better than that. Let me just try to see AI benchmarks, something like that, and see if we can find some images here. There was a different image that I was looking for, but I guess something like this is here, something like this, right? How much better do they get? This is, of course, length of task rather than just capability. This would be another example. Let me see if I can get this up here. This is closer to benchmark. Can we make this bigger? I am unable to make this bigger. For some reason, I can't make this bigger. So yeah, my like obviously a lot of benchmarks don't like increase linearly, but I think there is a strong sense that on the order of most benchmarks kind of feel to me like they start out with something where LLMs have like 10% performance, and then they go up to 90% performance over 2 years. That's kind of my. I wish that I had some better graphs of this, but that's my general sense of how these benchmark graphs generally go.
I mean, yeah. The thing is, now we have to talk about tests and the fact that human beings are limited in our certain capabilities, and in order to pass the test, we have to actually know the material, whereas AIs just have to, get really good at taking the test. So when you see performance go up in a benchmark, I don't know. I think I've said this before.
Yeah, I think it's. I do agree with you that benchmarks are pretty problematic, and I agree with you that benchmark could be improved substantially. But I also feel that they are, in fact, reflecting. It's not just training to the test, right? There is something real underneath, in a sense.
Yes.
Great.
But I think there is, in a sense, so the thing that's real isn't what you think you are getting. You think you're getting a model that's really good at I don't know, general purpose reasoning or whatever, when it's just like it's think of the old example of if you give it a logic puzzle but change some really important details on how it's structured, it'll still give you the original answer to the logic problem. And I think this sometimes persists even through chain of thought. So it's like it's recognizing the test of human natural language prediction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with this. There are a number of examples, like the zebra puzzle. You have a number of animals that need to get across a river, and they can't all fit in the boat at the same time. So this kind of um, if you give this example to a an LLM, especially a couple of years ago, because it's a well-known example, then you would get an answer which is like the standard answer. And then if you said you had only one animal, it would still give you this. It would still pattern match to this the way that you're supposed to solve this problem. I think this is what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
But then a thing you can do is you can formulate this as like a general optimization problem, something that is like that does not pattern match to zebras and doesn't have any. And then in general, it's a much harder problem for it. But once it is capable of actually solving this, then you can change it in whatever way you want, and it will still have a good performance on that. So there's a sense that this chaining to the test allows you to get very good performance on very badly designed benchmarks. But a well-designed benchmark is one. It isn't that difficult to make a well-designed benchmark where you can't cheat in any meaningful way.
I think it is basically impossible to have a benchmark that such that you can't prepare for the test, such that you can't get a massive boost in your test scores by training on previous versions of the test. I think that's basically impossible.
Well, to the extent that the test actually reflects the underlying reality, then that's just called learning the material, right? But
I mean, if a test like that existed for humans, we would really, really like it. It would be really, really useful for a bunch of stuff. But when in real life we have this thing called the test retest effect, and what we actually do to bypass this problem for stuff like IQ tests is just say really loudly to the person taking the test, please don't practice for this test
yeah,
ever in your entire life. Thank you.
yeah,
And yeah, and I think the reality is, if you actually do try, if you take a person with an average IQ and have them, prepare for an IQ test, train for an IQ test, they can get to something like 130, 140, which is interestingly enough the number you need to get into Mensa, which also explains a lot about Mensa.
yeah. Okay, so this is an interesting question because what we're doing here, of course, is we are proposing a limit for when you would actually do regulation. So that means that the AI companies, they could perhaps cheat on the benchmarks by training hard against these benchmarks. But that would subject them to harder regulation, right?
Yes.
So they probably don't have like a really, they don't have a strong, if this, what we're writing here, is put into effect, this will not increase their incentive to train on the tests. This will make the incentives worse.
What I'm trying to say is that our current world has all of these models grinding really, all of these companies grinding really hard to get high performance on not just these theoretical benchmarks like Winograd schemas, but actual user ratings and how much money can they charge for a company to use this model internally, stuff like that. So, given that's the world we live in, if there's a strong incentive that they stop doing grinding really hard against well-known benchmarks, then their performance on those benchmarks are no longer going to be very indicative of their state-of-the-art performance in ways that people actually care about.
I think I would disagree. I think that if uh, if the people who are building these models totally did not care about benchmarks, then I think the benchmarks would more faithfully reflect the capabilities.
Yeah, but it also means that the limits they set for these benchmarks may not be exceeded until we get to superhuman AI.
Sure, but the limit that I'm saying is who is on top, who has the best, and that means that there will always like
Yeah,
be.
but it would like but in the word I'm describing, it would be a legacy model, like current models. Like 5 years from now, we have models that are, actually contributing 50% of the world's GDP, but they still perform less good at those specific benchmarks than ChatGPT does today because they aren't trying that hard anymore. Or rather, maybe they explicitly obfuscate their performance on those tests. You don't need to do this like explicitly. You can fine tune it so that it does really poorly on specific benchmarks. And it's very hard to really catch them if, in a way that matters.
Well, one thing
Yeah, it
that
also
is,
wouldn't be illegal, right? Like that would
yeah,
be fair according to the law. You can, how do you say, sandbag, and that's a valid way to get around this law if it's a possibility to still get a
yeah,
well-selling model.
yeah. Like we have to have the general assumption here that the developers are not explicitly cheating or like doing something close to cheating with this, but that also holds for the compute benchmarks. Because if you had a compute level, then that's also just reported by
Well,
the developer, right?
it's
And
more like maybe they just exclude all of these benchmarks specifically from their future training data.
yeah, I think like uh, if they do something simple like that, then that's probably really easy to catch, right? Because then you could just see, okay, they have a new model, and suddenly it is just as good as coding, except on the coding. Everybody agrees that it's just as good as coding, except that on the coding benchmark, it suddenly performs dramatically lower.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah,
pretty obviously cheating, right?
but like, what are you suggesting that there is legal action taken against them because they aren't specifically including coding benchmarks in their training data?
Sure, if they're doing that for the purpose of cheating the EU regulation, then sure, yeah, yes.
I mean, in actuality, that's like incredibly vague. I mean, they all the engineers would have to do like maybe the engineers generally it's like there are all these subtle social interactions,
Hmm.
and eventually the end decision is, yeah, let's not include as much of the code force data set in our next model because we don't want to like something make it too fragile, or they can make something up on the spot. And then so there's like this very opaque decision, and then EU says, well, no, actually, you have to include the code force data set in your future models. And you have to do it in these specific ways. Like, what are we even suggesting that the EU legislation require?
Yeah, so I think this is probably like, remember we're talking about something like 3 developers or something like this. So, and I think this is the kind of thing that probably is pretty obvious because, like, we are imagining the thing where DeepMind is being hit by these regulations, and then they
Okay.
release a new version of their model that suddenly performs dramatically worse on these benchmarks. Um,
I
like
mean, that has happened before.
that has happened before, right? But in this case, like this is something where like there would obviously be people asking for a reason why is it suddenly performing a lot worse on these benchmarks, and why are you still writing on your website it's your best model ever, even though the benchmark says it's a lot worse. Um, I think this is the kind of thing that.
I mean, during fine tuning, you have to sacrifice like some performance on some benchmark. Like, are you suggesting that they're able to? Are you suggesting that you require these AI companies to fine tune their models in such a way that their scores on all of these different benchmarks never go down significantly?
So that's an interesting question.
Like, what
What
are
does
you
it mean?
actually asking?
Yeah, like what does it mean when a benchmark goes down? They release a new
Because it
model.
sounds like you're requesting these AI companies to pay extreme amounts of attention to all of these benchmarks, make sure that their AIs don't have a score that's constant, that doesn't go up, that doesn't go down, despite whatever fine tuning they're doing. That's called a useless benchmark.
Hmm. Yeah, like
In practice, I guess
yeah.
we would they would continue to perform well on the benchmarks realistically if they are not trying to on purpose circumvent this law. I'm a bit worried that will they on purpose try to circumvent the law?
I
Because
mean, they don't need to
that's what it's going to
consciously
take.
circumvent the law. They just don't have to fine tune on
If
these
we,
benchmarks.
I would like to compare with the international tax law, or like the tax laws of different countries, and how large global companies relate to that. And my understanding is that they never really break any tax laws, but they really push the limits of it and try to use any loophole they can. And the parallel here would be like, yeah, they will follow this AI Act, but they will definitely be clear that they will try to avoid the law as far as possible. And yeah, that might not be something they feel they have to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I think I would agree that this is something that we should probably write here. Some considerations about to what extent can the companies game these benchmarks. And I think this is an interesting. I
Well, I mean,
think there
given the
is.
nature of fine tuning, there's no such thing as not gaming the benchmarks, because you have to decide whether or not to include it in your data set. Whether or not you're fine tuning on these specific benchmarks. If you fine tune on these specific benchmarks, then the score goes up. If you don't fine tune on these specific benchmarks, the score goes down. And so it's like you have to have a. Are you saying they have a certain ratio of these benchmarks that they have to include their fine tuning?
Kind of.
But then there's
I'm assuming that they like the obvious innocent thing for them to do is to when they have a new model, then they do the same kind of fine tuning as they did on the last model.
that's not a real thing. People are constantly changing these things up.
Hmm.
I mean, think of like every
Yeah.
single advance in AI over the past year. Like R1 fine tunes in a fundamentally different way than all other AIs or large language models.
Hmm. Yeah. That's an interesting question. Like, to what extent is it possible to like counter game this? I um I think I would put this down as a substantial challenge that a new EU AI Safety Institute who designs some new benchmarks would need to seriously consider how they can make benchmarks that cannot easily be gamed. Possibly part of that would include to make them secret. There's also the adversarial benchmark system that you are proposing. Um, and I think this is, it does seem to me like uh, a pretty difficult task to do something dramatically unseen. But there is.
What? Can you say that
Yeah,
again?
yeah. Okay. So imagine that we go back to the chatbot arena here, and the new EU law starts happening now. and the coding benchmarks for the 205 Pro preview, then 08, so the next version, this one goes down dramatically. So this one falls off from straight ones, then it falls off to straight fours. So if we say the top 3 need to be regulated, then it seems like if performance drops below DeepSeek for Gemini, that seems really, really, really obviously suspicious, right?
No, because that's maybe they're fine-tuning on stuff that's not specifically benchmarked data. Like that's part of normal AI development. If you make these requirements too stringent, then at some point DeepSeek and US AI corps are going to shrug and say Europe isn't that big of a market compared to having a super intelligence.
Yeah.
And at that point they have no reach.
Yeah, that is in fact.
It's it's like how much control does the EU have on say the development and R&D of hydraulic fracturing technologies? The answer is essentially zero.
Yeah, I would strongly expect. This is something that I agree with, and this is a general problem for the EU AI Act, that if all the risk comes from models that are not in the EU, then the EU AI Act has a real challenge in how to deal with it.
What I'm trying to say is that we're trying to design this thing, this model that works around all these different problems and adding all these epicycles. But really, I think the premise is flawed. It's like we need to find extremely good benchmarks. We spend a lot of effort on thinking these things through. So we can just say in our response that as it exists, we can list all the problems we already stated, right? Gaming these benchmarks, scores going up and down, being relatively normal for these type of fine-tuning operations. So it's our current benchmarks are not good enough, period. If we try to actually use them, we get nothing done. And therefore, we need to try really hard to get new benchmarks and think through what we really need and how we can achieve them. That I think should be our fundamental contribution.
Yeah, I think I would accept that there is a substantial amount of work to be done there. Yeah. I think I'm more optimistic. How do people feel about continuing? I think this is a good point, and I'm very happy with that. Let's continue. Here I wrote this, and you had this point about DeepSeek version 3. That took 4 to 10 to 20 second flops. Yeah. And so what with general purpose, that is a term which seems like how many different things can the model do, which we really don't care about. Why would we care about how many things the model can do, right?
I think when people say general purpose, they just mean you can hold a conversation with it and ask it to do stuff you might ask a human to do, and it would execute the task. Sometimes with crazy results, but you can just talk to it and ask it to do stuff, and it would make a good faith effort to do so. That's what people actually mean when they say general purpose.
Yeah, and I think this is pretty reasonable, and to some extent that the thing that I think when I hear general purpose is capable of doing strategic tasks, strategic cognitive reasoning, which is basically the same thing, but that isn't actually that important. The important thing from an AI existential risk is how good is it at doing these things? Because it might be able to do 20 things, but if it's capable of doing all these 20 things really, really badly only, then that's not dangerous at all, right?
Huh.
So what we actually care about is the maximal capability. What is it best at? Because if this model is in fact the best in the world by a large margin at creating biological weapons, then it is really, really dangerous. And then whether it also can do poetry doesn't matter at all. Whereas,
I mean, it actually matters a huge amount because a specialized model that can do biological research is kind of safe, but if the same model can actually like write slam poetry and talk about political ideologies and hold a conversation, then you should start getting concerned.
I think I would also like if a model is exceptionally powerful at creating biological weapons, I would also be pretty concerned.
Yeah, but it's like
Generality is a multiplier in a sense that a model that can do many things, including making bad biological weapons, is worse than one that is only really good at making bad biological weapons. But the one that is really good at making bad biological weapons is a lot worse than a model who can do a lot of things poorly. So here I introduced 3 different hypothetical AIs. The middle one is really good at making biological weapons. The more dangerous is like general can hold a conversation and create biological weapons. And the one that's worse than that is the one that can do a lot of things, like GPT-3 style. Right? GPT-3 is general in that GPT-3 can do a lot of things. It just does them really poorly.
okay.
Yeah. So I think I will try to write this distinction in here, and I think that's it's a good point. I think there may be some level of confusion. So here, this is an interesting thing here. Like one advantage with my model here is like companies have a really strong incentive to be on top of this leaderboard here. Like one thing where I mean our models might diverge a bit is if we go down a bit to one model no one has ever heard about, like Mistral Medium here. How hard does Mistral try to get up on this leaderboard?
Probably significantly hard.
I think they try pretty hard. I think they would, in fact, really, really like to go on top here.
Can you go down a little bit? I think there's a Chinese model no one's ever heard of before.
Yeah, I also saw some. Why is that? Oh my god. To the left. Maybe if I refresh the page, hold on.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah. There is a number of models here that we don't hear very much about. And I think this is pretty interesting. Overview. Like some of these, this Hunyuan Turbo. I also noticed this.
Yeah.
This is an example of a model where I think, like my.
Oh yeah, it's a shitty Tencent model. Yeah, I know what it is. that was the one I was referring to when I said a model that a Chinese model that came out before R1 that did well on benchmarks but was actually really bad.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, that's actually pretty interesting. But this is an example of a model that I think poses very low existential risk. And now, of course, it's even less when you are saying that actually you know that it's actually really bad. That's worse than these benchmarks hint at. So I'm trying to. This is absolutely not one. Oh well. Yeah. So okay. So like there is just a huge marketing advantage to getting on top of this board. Like companies, depending on how onerous the EU Act is, then yeah, there will be, if you regulate based on benchmarks, there will be a lower incentive to get to the top, but there will still be a really large incentive to get to the top here, because like people say that like yeah, I think this is just something that even though few people look at these, then I think the information that Google have the best models and Meta's models are strictly worse than that is something that filters down to a lot of people. So I think people care a lot about this.
Yeah, and I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So
I would like to question. I mean, the scenario if these leaderboards end up being the deciding factor for if the law applies or not. I think people will understand that companies have less of an incentive to rise in this and will not consider these leaderboards as much as an indication of how good they are.
yeah, I agree. Like once a measure becomes a target, then it becomes a less good measure. This is probably unavoidable. Also, in the same sense that if you put a limit on 10 to the 22nd flops, probably we are going to see a lot of models being trained by 0.9, like with 90% of that compute, right? To go just under.
Yes, which would still solve the issue if the limit is reasonable.
Yeah.
Or works pretty well towards the issue. I suspect.
But this kind of ties into what my expectation would be if this regulation was actually passed. Like if let's say that this is actually passed and they say, okay, according to our benchmarks, Gemini is the most powerful. Please create a safety case for Gemini or undeploy the model.
What is a safety case?
A safety case, yeah, it's a very, very some rigorous argument why Gemini 2.5 will not pose a systemic risk.
I mean, they have some okay argument. Like you're trying to persuade a EU bureaucrat of this.
Yeah.
And say what you will about EU bureaucrats, and I don't think they're like extremely technically, are they extremely technically inclined? Are they like all
they are pretty
engineers
technical.
and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Just see if I can get this. I think they are using the word safety case in this, but let me just check if that is a word that, like, sometimes you read this and then they do in fact not use the term safety case, which is a bit annoying because I thought there was a term that they used, and that was why I referred to that, and they do in fact not use that, which is a bit shame. Because yeah. Okay. So yeah, I should probably restate my the way I've used the word safety case. So like the idea is that we should have some kind of very strong regulation on these top models, and then the EU goes to Google and say, hey, we need to have strong regulation on Gemini 2.5, and then we want some kind of assurance that won't kill a lot of people, and then Google say, sorry, we can't give you an assurance that Gemini 2.5 won't kill a lot of people.
I mean, it fundamentally comes down to like what guarantees they're willing to accept, right? And the fact that they're asking these companies to actually provide them with guarantees means that they can imagine an argument that these companies can make that would persuade them. Like it's probably like, I think it's Jan LeCunt here, or the what's his name? You know who I'm talking about? The guy who's very pessimistic on AI capabilities, who had like a schizophrenic meltdown a couple months back.
I don't actually know the part about the schizophrenic. So, but yeah, I think that the EU bureaucrats imagine that in the same way when you're building a nuclear power plant, then you can create a document that say this nuclear power plant will not blow up and kill everyone with probability 99999. Right? And
Okay.
these
And
people are imagining that Google could produce the same document for Gemini, but they're just not producing this document because the regulation don't force them to do that.
okay.
I think that is what the bureaucrats think.
But that would imply extremely dumb bureaucrats.
Yeah, well, they are certainly not AI X-risk pilled bureaucrats. Yeah.
Okay.
I would expect that there is some kind of dissonance where Dario Amodei says, yeah, there is like 10 to 25% chance that this will kill literally everyone. And people accept this kind of implicitly, but it's a cognitive dissonance in that if they go out to the EU and write a paper and say, hey, can we get a written permission slip that allows us to kill in expectation 1 billion people, like 1/8 probability of killing 8 billion people. Can we have a permission slip that say we're allowed to do this? Then the bureaucrats will say absolutely not. Right? So this is
but they're not
cognitive
gonna
dissonance.
they're not gonna do that. Obviously, they're gonna say, "Well, we're absolutely sure our AI is completely safe," and it doesn't seem that hard to come up with arguments that says your AIs are safe. Really, you just have to like find some academics and have them like give, preferably ones that genuinely believe this, and have them, give a quite good logical arguments on why the current model place has absolutely zero risk. And I expect this to also be like they could also do this for a model that's genuinely dangerous in like an existential sense, and not in like a low probability, but in a high probability sense.
Yeah, so this is obviously a challenge, right? That you could imagine that they are required to give, depending on what kind of rigor is required, a rigorous mathematical proof that this is not dangerous, but then they they can't give that, so they give something that is like weaker.
I mean,
and
you can absolutely give a rigorous mathematical proof for why Chernobyl was a perfectly safe power plant.
well, you can't actually do that, right? You can
What?
give something that looks like a rigorous proof that Chernobyl can never melt down, but you can't actually create a mathematical proof that Chernobyl can never melt down.
Yes, and in the exact same sense that you can actually have a proof for, this particular power plant in Norway has only a 0.0001% chance of killing 1 million people.
Yeah, but I think there is a substantial difference here in that if, like right now, there is absolutely nothing like this produced by Google DeepMind. They do not have anything like a formal description of why Gemini will not kill everyone. And if they produce this, and it is like when we are assuming that it is very wrong, then that creates a pretty strong leverage point against Google DeepMind, right? Because they have said given a safety case, and presumably, like this will be public, and people will read this, and people will say, "Hey, this is actually wrong in some sense."
Well, yeah, I mean, if they do that, I just don't think this whole thing's going to go the way you think it's going to go. My gut feeling is you're going to find like respectable academics like Jan LeCun who will swear upside down there's absolutely zero existential risk from current models, and then he'll like pull out his very like sophisticated logical arguments that like are airtight, and I think if someone can spend like we're all talking about unknowns, but you can point to a specific model and say, well, given this data distribution for its outputs, it is therefore completely safe. And if you can't do that, if there's some sense you can't do that for current large language models, there's like in some sense a how do I put this? If you okay, so if you can't do that for current large language models, you also can't do that for nuclear power plants.
So, like right now, people who want to build a nuclear power plant have to make, I presume, some very extensive paperwork about the safety plans, right?
Yeah.
And we have absolutely nothing that is in any way similar for Gemini 2.5. Like we have a system card, but the system card is extremely different. I don't even know, have they published a system card for Gemini 2.5? But we have earlier system cards, right? And these look nothing like what you would expect a safety plan for a nuclear power plant to look like.
Okay.
And I would expect that if they tried to make this, then they would, like, obviously they could make it in like really bad, but I think, and they could also like have someone really respectable to sign off on it. But if you have something that is like the power plant from The Simpsons or something like that, then when an expert looks at the safety report from the power plant in Springfield, then they will say, hey, this power plant is in fact not well run.
Okay, but most experts are not AI existential risk pilled.
Sure, but but a lot of these people can, like, the quality of the arguments right now are really poor. Like if you look at what Jan LeCun writes, it's absolutely atrocious, right? And someone from an AI safety institute that is like looking at a report that is extremely poor quality would probably be able to say, hey, this is in fact not good enough.
Okay. But that's more just a consensus of experts, and I doubt it's going to go the way you think it's going to go.
Yeah, so actually I did in fact have something that I did not put in the presentation up front, but here I have some thoughts here that I also wanted to just run by you. And one of them here is like, how impactful will this actually be if these models are regulated? What will actually happen?
I think it's going to create some jobs for EU bureaucrats and EU lawyers. Other than that, I doubt it's going to
matter. I think there is a substantial chance that you're right. Depending on the specifics, it is very possible that the outcome will be nothing. But the EU can sometimes be pretty powerful. Like the EU does have a substantial amount of weight to throw around. And it does look like they're taking this pretty seriously. So, like if they, like, you could imagine like the opposite, right? That instead of, like, usually things go the wrong way, but things could also just by luck go the right way, in the sense that, hey, the EU decides we should only regulate the American companies, so we should regulate that really hard. And so they require a really strong safety report from these three companies, coincidentally because they're from the United States. And then they look over the report that they sent back, like really carefully. And if the report is really bad, which I strongly expect it to be, then they could in fact reject it.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's like, now we have to pull back to geopolitics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine you're in the Trump administration and you see the Europeans try to pull this stuff. Mm-hmm. You know that there's like, there are these weird safety regulations that kind of bar U.S. food and software and I think possibly some cars. Yeah, from the European market. Mm-hmm. And this has always been seen as a protectionist measure by the White House going back several decades. So you see them, if you see them pulling this stuff with like I think you're underestimating the amount of squeeze US can put on the European Union,
Yeah,
economically speaking.
I think there is a substantial chance that you are right about this. There is a substantial chance that no matter what the EU regulation looks like, um, it will be ineffective for reasons of geopolitics that is pretty distinct from what is actually written in the EU AI Act. Because it is possible that Donald Trump decides that today is a day where he hates the European Union, and no matter what requirements are put on these companies by the EU AI Act, they will just reject it. So and if they literally reject anything, yeah, then the EU AI Act doesn't matter. But it could also be that things change, and Donald Trump could change his opinion to not be like maximalist hardliner into something where he says, yeah, okay, they writing a report that they won't kill us all is something that he accepts this requirement on
Is
his
that like
mind.
the actual ask for this legislation? That they have to write a report for why AI won't kill everyone?
So that was actually an interesting question because that was one of the things that I think I kind of missed up here in that like I've used the word safety case, which basically means this, but they are also saying something like, let's just see, there were some examples. Where did I use uh, here? Examples of activities and methods that are specifically aimed at making the model safer. And what would present a rigorous justification that this is the case? So a rigorous justification for safety. That's the safety case. So that's what I kind of wrote down here, that about safety cases, and they're not actually explicitly saying, yeah, they want a rigorous justification that a model is safe, but they're not that far off. So I think now that I read this, I recognize that they're not in fact talking about a safety case here. So I may have to change some language from time to time about like what actually happens for the high risk models. Like
Yeah,
obviously,
I was also a little bit confused about that. So they have to
yeah.
submit. Do they have to submit a safety case? What do they actually have to do?
Yeah. Like, what does the EU AI Act say that you have to do if you have a high risk model? And um, I think it is probably not a. I think actually there's a chance that this is something where they haven't actually decided this yet. Um, yeah, I think they are. This consultation is like part of like is it like a two-step process where they're first talking about like what are the general purpose AI rules, and then like what do we actually do with the high risk models. I think this is how it is supposed to go. So this is just one of the consultations.
Oh,
So there is also one about let's see if I can find this. Yeah, where did I read this? Um, um, Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it is in fact possible that I will need to. Is it on top of this document, perhaps? Mm, yeah, because AI. It is somewhere. No, I must admit I can't find it, which is kind of annoying. Um, so it is possible that I said something wrong here, because it is also not here. But my understanding is that like this is about what is like a general model, and how do we regulate the general purpose models, which are the ones that are, not really that dangerous in my mind. And then what we actually want for the high risk models is written somewhere else, and I really wish I could find that. Yeah, okay. So I will write down that, like, I should check if it's like in two parts with like high risk as the other one. Yeah, because this is cool. Yeah. So let's continue further down. Here, focus on other modalities. Here, I don't know if you ended up agreeing with my claim here that image generation models are pretty irrelevant. Like, image generation models can do some of these things, but as far as I can tell, for basically all of the strategic cognitive task, text generation is the central modality.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. Yeah, here I'm saying that yeah, pre-training, like one thing that I kind of felt was pretty important was like inference compute. So they talk about the only way they distinguish between different models is on how much compute for training and especially pre-training, and it feels like you can like do different things depending on how much compute you have available for inference, and you can like if you you can do a lot of things with more inference compute that can improve capabilities quite a bit. So like I can see why they focus on pre-training compute, but on training compute, but it does seem like an oversight somewhat. Here, this is yeah. I agree. You have some more things here. Sampling temperature, prompt. Didn't I write prompts? I thought I also wrote prompt here, but I apparently didn't do. Yeah, but yeah, I strongly agree that there's a lot of things you could do here. Here, I added this pretty late, this here, because like what entity is the provider of a given general purpose AI model? And then they have spent a lot of time trying to clarify this, and it feels like this is a question you ask a lawyer, not me. Like, how do joint ventures work? Who is actually responsible in a joint venture? That's really, really not something that I know a lot about. But the thing that I'm worried about here is down here you can see that Google says, oh, DeepMind is its own separate entity. So if DeepMind does something very bad, then it is totally not something that Google should have to pay for, right? And I think this is something that is important for, like, if they will presumably need some actual real lawyers to write this part of the AI Act. But I think just clarifying this is the thing we are trying to avoid is pretty important. Here I have some ideas. To change the risk, but uses less compute than this limit. And here, yeah, I had this general explanation of my model, and Connor says I should put this in somewhere, perhaps with the description of why this. And I think this is basically, I agree with Connor. I will put this up further up. Here, I have this kind of idea about strict liability like obviously I'm not a lawyer, and this is not actually what strict liability means. But everybody is talking about whether these models can be stolen, right? This is not something that is peripheral to OpenAI. Like you can see this AI 2027, which hinges on a model being stolen. And this is obviously something that these companies care very, very, very much about, right? So there is a sense that the reasonably foreseen consequences of training a model includes that this model might be stolen. And then the security precaution might be removed, and then it might do some bad things. Like this is something that OpenAI, because they are spending so much time thinking about this, they cannot reasonably argue that they haven't actually been able to foresee this. And because it's something that they foresee as a plausible consequence of training this model, that in this way it will get some people killed, then they should be liable when they say, yeah, this is a plausible consequence, but we're still going to train this model anyway. So, and that kind of feels, it's almost the same thing as strict liability, because once someone else takes off all the safety precautions, then basically anything could happen. So it is kind of like strict liability already. But I'm just saying here that, yeah, we should have actual strict liability. Because if they are already, like when they are deciding, should we train a new model and what safety precautions should we add, then they are thinking about the case where this model is stolen. So that the fact that the model is stolen is a future possibility that they have foreseen. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is legal speculation, and I don't think it really helps us.
Yeah, I agree. So a lot of these, like, how are open source licenses in different ways? Like, I would be very happy with a model with an EU AI Act that regulated the most capable models and did not regulate open source at all. Because it just so happens that we live in a world where the most powerful models are not open source.
Citation needed. R1's extremely powerful and open source.
Yeah, open source and open weights, right?
Yeah.
And that is pretty fortunate. I think this will continue to hold. Like, just to clarify, the parameters, the weights of DeepSeek are not public, right?
What? Everything's public.
Everything's public, also the weights.
Absolutely everything. Yeah, well, except for the data.
Not the training data, are you sure? The training data is not.
Yeah. They're keeping that close to their chest.
Yeah. But you could imagine there probably are some models where everything is fully open source.
Okay.
And as long as it's very obvious that there is a specific legal entity that is responsible for DeepSeek right now because they have the secret training data, right? So everybody knows where the buck stops, in a sense. Whereas if you imagine that there are probably some models where literally everything is open. And for these, it's not at all clear who is actually responsible for these models. Like if everything is open, then it can be basically, then anyone can make them. And I'm very happy about the fact that we live in a world where you cannot, in fact, build a state-of-the-art model based solely on public data, where everything is open source.
I mean,
because that would be.
I think. I mean, man, I don't think that's really that much of a leap. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they release a full data set. I mean, I would be surprised, but not by that much.
Yeah, we are still they like DeepSeek is not literally the state of the art, right? They are like number five, four or five, something like that, right?
I what? I mean, it's close enough,
It's close
and
enough,
it's
and
free.
like and I worry about like this is a trade-off that I am not making happily to say that yeah we don't regulate fully open source models. Um, I like okay. Imagine DeepSeek also makes training data. Say we are like a totally open company and puts everything out in the open, and they continue to work and continue to improve while having everything completely open, and they attract more investors, and they eventually, um, become state of the art while being completely open. I think this is something that could happen and would make regulation substantially more difficult. But it is somewhat unlikely in my model. Like, I would imagine like the top companies are probably going to be the same top companies for a while. Like Google, OpenAI, Anthropic have some pretty substantial advantages, and these are companies that are definitely not going to go full open source.
Okay.
So that means that probably open source
I mean,
models don't matter from an
Facebook.
AI existential risk perspective.
Okay. Well, I mean, you can make some clever arguments, but like R1 still is a real thing, and it's really, really good.
Hmm.
And OpenAI was called OpenAI. Um, like they
Hmm. Yeah.
you just need I think it's something like okay, if you have an open source model, you get all of these benefits where people random people all over the world scrutinize your model intensively and like uh and yeah, you get a lot of feedback on your models, and if you're a small company and you're trying to be agile, that could definitely work out to your benefit. And sometimes and OpenAI was once a small open source company, much like DeepSeek
Hmm.
is today, and like w- they were able to leverage their insights into being the front runner for AI. So it's like it's not obvious to me that like DeepSeek couldn't make a model tomorrow release a model tomorrow that was just incredibly good, much better than GPT-4, and yeah, have it be completely open source. That wouldn't be terribly surprising to me.
It would be a bit more surprising on my model. Like one person I would imagine would object to this pretty strongly would be Xi Jinping. Um,
Why?
because like if he instead of making this completely public, then says like keeps this a secret and only gives the best model to the people he wants to have them. Like why does he actually want Taiwan to have this strong model?
Well, because they want like the current models aren't the end. You want to get to artificial superintelligence,
Hmm.
and you need to iterate in order to do that. And open sourcing stuff helps you iterate
Yeah.
really well when you're strapped for resources. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, he'll just look at him, say, you guys seem to know what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing and make
Hmm.
China proud.
I think that it is a possibility. And like I think there is a lot of value in uh, not regulating open source. Like uh, you put like
I mean,
hmm?
how does Europe even regulate
Yeah,
DeepSeek?
exactly right. It is in fact really difficult to regulate open source. And just by saying we are not going to regulate it, then that causes a tiny bit of extra risk. But to my mind, it's pretty small. I would be pretty surprised if like how can I put this in a good way? Like the expectation of how many days in the future that fully open, like 100% open models are like state of the art or in the top three is pretty low actually. I have a hard time seeing that as a serious, like a lot of these things are pretty expensive, and it's pretty surprising to me that DeepSeek came along with like this little regard for money in a sense. Um,
I mean, I don't think they're stupid. I think they have a plan and they
yeah,
know exactly what they're doing.
yeah,
And their plan has worked out really well thus far.
yeah. But I think once they make everything 100% open, then they also lose a lot. They lose a lot of strategic power.
I mean, right now, but again, it's about
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
race to control the future. And I would make the case that anyone who's not the big players will want to go open source.
yeah. I think I would accept this. Yeah, I think you've convinced me enough that I think I will write something about open source, like that it's a difficult trade-off. Um, yeah,
Okay, is there anything else we need to get to? And also, we need to talk about our next discussion.
yeah. So here, like, what are the alternatives to estimate how much compute is being used instead of flops? Like cost and energy, I say here.
Mm.
Because like if you have a cost and say yeah it costs to run a state of the art training run that costs 10 million euro, well, if someone is willing to pay 10 million euro, then saying yeah you also have to run some benchmarks and fill out a form is very reasonable. And if you use a
Mm.
power metric instead, like um, some of these training runs are like between like fission bombs and fusion bombs right now. And
Yeah.
like if you use as much power as a fusion bomb, then I think having some kind of documentation for safety practice is a reasonable ask. So these are the advantages of this, but there are also substantial disadvantages. Like I
Yeah.
say, they are impractical. Impractical. So I'm not really suggesting that we do this. Like because like once you start to count like how much did it cost to train GPT-4, like that's a really difficult question.
Oh, and you brought this up
Hmm?
before. I'm not sure why I remember it now, but it's pronounced panacea.
Panacea? Thank you. That's the problem with only reading and not watching very much. So yeah.
Yeah, I referred to Quakers as quackers in middle school.
Yeah, like how are you supposed to know that? I think that's extremely reasonable. Here, yeah, this here, how can they reasonably do this? And you made the point that this is in fact really, really difficult. Like if you spend a lot of effort on a really, really high quality training set, you can get dramatically better performance, and you can scale this up in a sense. Like you can
Mhm.
imagine that you can dump extreme amount of computes into the data set.
I mean,
Um,
that's what model distillation is
Yeah,
in a way,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And you can basically distill, like the upper limits for distillations is extremely, extremely high. So you need a strong way to capture this, um, and that is very, very difficult. How do you actually capture how much compute went into creating this data set? And I think this is a major strike against a flop-based benchmark.
Okay. And what? Yeah. And okay, yeah, and I don't think the other benchmarks are well. Okay, I think we disagree on how useful the other benchmarks are, but yeah. Okay. Anything
Yeah.
else?
No, yeah, I have some idea here for how to do this, but I think this is basically all I have. I think I have enough here to make the submission. I will do that tomorrow morning. So I'm just
Okay.
gonna stop the recording now. Anyone else have any comments before I start?